The message came on a Tuesday. Not that Tuesday meant anything out past the Vega cluster, where the galactic conclave held its sessions in a station the size of a small moon. But for Ambassador Joran Hale, who still kept Earth time on his wrist, Tuesday was when everything ended. He was eating a protein bar, the synthetic kind, because real food was too expensive on a diplomat's travel budget, when Chancellor Var's face appeared on every screen in the human delegation's quarters. The Chancellor's face was long and gray, with eyes like polished black stone. The Sarathi had been running the conclave for 4,000 years. They did not look worried often. Var looked worried. The Dreth have passed the outer veil, the Chancellor said. All projections confirm. The advance cannot be stopped at current resource levels. Joran set down his protein bar. He already knew what was coming. Every human diplomat in the room knew. They had been watching the resource reports for 6 months, watching the numbers quietly shift away from the defensive lines closest to human space. Not fast. Not in a way anyone could point to and call a betrayal, just a slow, steady drift, the way water moves away from a shore before a wave comes in. The conclave has voted, Var said. A strategic withdrawal to the core systems will begin in 48 hours. Joran stood up. You're leaving us, HFY said. His voice was flat. You're leaving the outer sectors. The outer sectors cannot be held. The conclave deeply regrets. Stop. Joran held up one hand. Don't say you regret it. The Chancellor paused. In 4,000 years of Sarathi diplomacy, probably no one had interrupted him mid-sentence. Humanity was warned, Var said after a moment. His voice had gone cooler. When you joined the conclave, you were told that your sector was border territory. You were told that it could not be guaranteed. We were told it would be defended. We defend what can be held, and there it was. The whole thing in one sentence. Joran felt it land in his chest like a stone dropping into deep water. Not rage. Not yet. Just the weight of it, the clean, cold logic of their decision. Humanity's sector was border territory. Earth was 40 light-years from the nearest core system. To the Sarathi, to the Vel, to the ancient Keth who had been building starships when humans were still drawing on cave walls. Earth was a frontier post, useful to have, not worth dying for. The 48 hours were a courtesy. They were being given time to say goodbye. Commander Elena Voss got the news 6 hours later, on the bridge of the EFS Constant, the flagship of the human sector fleet. She read the conclave bulletin twice. Then she set it down on the console and looked out through the forward viewport at the stars. Her first officer, Lieutenant Day Park, stood very still behind her. The bridge crew was silent. They had all read it. Options, Elena said. We could retreat, Dai said. Take the civilian ships and follow the conclave's withdrawal route. Make for the core systems. And Earth. Earth is a 12-day journey from the nearest relay gate. The Dreth are, he stopped. We couldn't evacuate Earth in time. Not even close. 8 billion people on Earth. Another 2 billion spread across the colony worlds. Kepler Station, New Meridian, the dry red plains of Proxima. All of them border territory. All of them acceptable losses in the conclave's arithmetic. Elena had served in the conclave's joint fleet for 11 years. She had followed their orders, filed their reports, saluted their flags. She had watched them treat humanity like the newest face at a table that had been set for thousands of years before humanity ever arrived. She had smiled through all of it. She kept looking at the stars. Get me General Command, she said. All sector commanders, open channel. They're already waiting, Day said. She turned from the viewport. The channel opened and 23 human fleet commanders appeared on the split screen. Some from their ships, some from colony defense stations. One, Admiral Yun Che, broadcasting from a hospital bed with tubes still in his arm. No one asked why they were meeting. You've all read the bulletin, Elena said. I want to hear from each of you. Once, brief, tell me what you think. She had expected anger. She had expected fear and calculation, and the careful voices of people preparing to run. Instead, what she got from 23 commanders was silence. Then Admiral Yun Che, 72 years old, tubes in his arm, sitting up straight in his hospital bed, said, My grandfather did not survive the siege of Old Seoul by retreating. Nobody spoke for a moment. We fight, said Commander Priya Anand from Kepler Station. We fight, said Commander Riku Sato from New Meridian. One by one, all 23. Elena closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then we fight, she said. The conclave's withdrawal was a magnificent thing to watch if you had no stake in it. Joran watched it from the observation deck of the human delegation's ship. The small, scratched, 20-year-old diplomatic transport that was the nicest vessel the Earth Foreign Office could afford. Around him in clean formation, the fleets of a dozen elder races were folding into hyperspace. Sarathi dreadnoughts the size of city blocks. Vel carrier ships like floating continents, carrying whole populations. Keth arc ships, ancient and slow, their hulls dark with 4,000 years of travel, all of them moving inward, toward safety, toward the core, away from humanity. Kelsari, the Sarathi aide who had been assigned to the human delegation for the past 3 years, came and stood beside him. She was young, by Sarathi standards, barely 800 years old. She had learned to drink coffee because Joran drank coffee, and she had never told her superiors about it because they would have considered it beneath her. "Your people should come," she said. "There would be room. On the civilian transport lists, they won't come," Joran said. "The Dreth cannot be fought with the weapons your fleet has, we know." Kelsari was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller. "I am sorry," she said. "I want you to know that. Not all of us." She stopped. "The vote was not unanimous." "What was the count?" She didn't answer. "Kel," he said. "What was the count?" 41-3, she said. He nodded slowly. 3 races had voted to stay, to fight, to hold the outer sectors. 3 out of 44 conclave members. He didn't ask which 3. "It didn't matter now. You should go," he said. "Your fleet is leaving." "Go," he said. Not angry, just tired in the way that goes all the way down to the bone. "You have nothing to be sorry for. You followed your government." She left. He stood at the viewport alone and watched the last of the conclave fleet disappear into hyperspace. The observation deck was very quiet. Then his communicator buzzed. "Ambassador Hale," it was Commander Voss. He had never spoken to her directly, but he knew her name the way all humans in the outer sectors knew Elena Voss. "I need you to stay at the conclave station. We need a voice there, someone watching." "Watching for what?" he said. "They've gone." "Not all of them," she said. 3 races voted no. "Find out who they are. Talk to them. We're going to need every friend we can get." He looked at the empty space where the fleets had been. Stars filled it, hard and cold and very old. "What are you going to do?" he said. "The only thing we can do," she said. The channel closed. The Dreth came into human space 11 days later. They did not come like an army. They came like weather. Like a pressure change that you felt before you saw it. A shift in the deep space sensor readings. A strange quiet on the long-range channels. A darkness at the edge of the scanner screens that spread and spread until it was not a shadow but a shape. Many shapes. They were not ships in any way that word was meant. The word ship meant something built, designed, put together by hands. The Dreth were something else. Grown, maybe. Or they were the vessels themselves. Dark and vast, moving through space the way deep ocean creatures move through water. Slow, patient. Certain of their right to every space they entered. The first Dreth unit crossed the outer relay at 0300 hours, Earth Standard. The sensor operator on duty at Relay Station 12 was a 24-year-old corporal named Dai-Yun Yun. She watched it come on her screen and sat very still for exactly 4 seconds. Then she triggered to the alert. Then she sent the burst transmission to Commander Voss. Then she kept her station. The Dreth did not destroy Relay Station 12 right away. It passed by. Perhaps it did not notice the station. Perhaps it noticed and did not consider it worth the effort. Either way, Dai-Yun Yun kept her post, kept transmitting sensor data, for 6 hours before the second wave arrived and the signal went dark. Her data was the first real intelligence humanity had on how the Dreth moved. Every human commander who reviewed it noted the same thing. The Dreth moved in clusters, 3 to 5 units traveling together, with gaps between each cluster. The gaps were not large, but they were there. Elena Voss marked those gaps on her tactical map. And she started to think. The first battle happened not where anyone expected. It happened at Kepler Station, where Commander Priya Anand had 6 destroyers, 1 aging cruiser, and a population of 300,000 people who had come to mine the asteroid belt, and had somehow ended up with children and schools, and a community orchestra that performed every 3rd Saturday. The Dreth came through the outer belt at dawn, local time. Priya Anand took her fleet out to meet them. She did not expect to win. She was not stupid. She knew what her 6 destroyers were worth against the Dreth. She had done the math 100 times in the days since the conclave left, lying awake in her bunk, running numbers that never came out right. But 300,000 people were behind her. The evacuation ships needed 4 more hours, so she went. What happened at the Battle of Kepler Station was not a victory by any normal measure. Humanity lost 4 of the 6 destroyers. The cruiser was gutted. Priya Anand herself was pulled from the wreckage with a broken collarbone and burns covering 30% of her body. But the Dreth cluster that hit Kepler Station was delayed. By 6 hours and 43 minutes, the evacuation ships got out with 297,000 people. The remaining 3,000, the ones too far from the ports, the ones who had stayed to keep the evacuation systems running, they did not make it. Priya Anand in the medical bay of a rescue ship stared at the ceiling and held that number. 3,000. She held it the way you hold a weight you know you will never put down. But 297,000 people were alive. The news traveled fast through what remained of human space. Not through official channels. It traveled the way important things always traveled. Through people telling other people. Through burst transmissions passed from ship to station, to colony to outpost. Kepler held 4 hours. Anand took them on. Did they win? No. But they didn't lose alone. It was not much. As war news went, it was barely a footnote. 4 destroyers lost. 1 station emptied. The Dreth had barely slowed down. But in every human settlement still standing in the outer sectors, people heard about it. And in every settlement, people stopped and thought the same thing. If Anand went out, maybe we can too. On the EFS Constant, Elena Voss received the full report, every number. She read the casualty list and did not rush past it. Every name got a second. That was the rule she had made for herself years ago, after the first battle she had commanded, and the first list she had filed. Every name got a second. Then she set the report aside and looked at her tactical map. The gaps between Dreth clusters. The time it took them to turn and reorient. The places where human ships, small and fast and entirely expendable, could go in and make things hard and costly and slow. She was not thinking about winning. Not yet. Winning was too large a word for where they were right now. She was thinking about something smaller, closer. She was thinking about making the Dreth pay for every single kilometer, making it cost them. Making it loud and long and ugly enough that the rest of the galaxy, wherever they were hiding behind their ancient walls, could not pretend they hadn't heard. She opened a channel to her fleet. This is Commander Voss. We begin operations at 600 hours. You all know what we're going into. I'm not going to tell you it will be fine. She paused. I'm going to tell you that we're going to make this matter. Every hour we hold them is an hour that counts. Every ship they have to deal with before they reach the next colony is a ship we put in their path. Another pause. They left us here to die. I have no interest in doing that quietly. She closed the channel. Outside the viewport, the stars were hard and cold and very old. Humanity had been among them for 200 years, which was nothing. Less than nothing, in the scale of things. A blink. But they were here, and they were not going anywhere. The Dreth did not understand what they were walking into. That was the only advantage humanity had, and Elena Voss intended to use every millimeter of it. The elder races had always fought the Dreth the same way. Large fleets, fixed defensive lines, concentrated firepower at known approach vectors. It was the way wars had been fought in this galaxy for thousands of years. You built a wall, you held the wall. If the wall fell, you built another one further back. It was a strategy that worked when you had enough ships to make a wall. Humanity did not have enough ships to make a wall. What humanity had was desperation and anger, and 11 years of Elena Voss's watching how the Dreth moved, studying every engagement report filed through the Conclave's joint fleet records, noticing things that the elder races, comfortable behind their walls, had not bothered to notice. The gaps between clusters, the reaction delay, the way a Dreth unit once committed to a direction took time to change course. Not long, 40, maybe 50 seconds by human measurement. But in a fight between small, fast ships and something the size of a city block, 50 seconds was a universe. She built her entire strategy around those 50 seconds. The first real test came at the Brennan asteroid field, 12 days after Kepler. 3 Dreth units were moving through the field toward New Meridian Colony, a population of 800,000 people on a planet with no natural shelter and 1 working orbital defense station. Commander Riku Sato had 7 ships, 2 destroyers, 4 fast patrol vessels, and 1 retrofitted mining hauler that his crew had spent 9 days welding weapons platforms onto until it looked like something a child had built from spare parts. Elena's orders were simple. Do not fight them. Annoy them. Sato went into the asteroid field and started moving rocks, not large ones, nothing dramatic. Just enough careful, precise use of his ship's tractor systems to nudge medium-sized asteroids, the kind the Dreth would normally ignore, into the paths where the Dreth units wanted to travel. Not to stop them, just to make them change course, again and again, enough to slow them down, make them recalculate, force those 50-second hesitations to stack up one after another. The Dreth spent 19 hours crossing a field they should have crossed in 4. New Meridian's evacuation finished with 6 hours to spare. Sato lost 1 patrol vessel. His own ship took damage bad enough that he had to seal 3 sections and vent the atmosphere. He spent the last 4 hours of the operation sitting in a pressure suit on his own bridge, because the life support in the command section had failed. When the evacuation confirmed complete, he sent a single-line message to Elena Voss, 800,000, all clear. She read it 3 times. Then she sent the plan to every remaining human fleet commander. every single detail of what Sato had done in the Brennan field. Not the result, the method, the thinking behind it. How you fight something you cannot beat by refusing to fight it the way it expects. You do not stand in front of the wave. You make the wave go somewhere it doesn't want to go. The conclave station was quieter now, which was its own kind of loud. Joran Hale had been to some empty places in his life, abandoned buildings back on Earth, dead relay stations at the edge of explored space, a bar in Geneva at 4 a.m. where the only other customer was a man who clearly did not want to be found. But the conclave station, after the withdrawal, had a particular quality of emptiness, like a lung with no air in it. The corridors that had once held thousands of diplomats, traders, advisors, and functionaries from 44 species now held mostly silence and the hum of systems running on low power. 3 delegations remained. The Tharaki, a small insect-like people from a cluster of worlds near the outer edge of the galactic arm. They had 6 ships in the conclave fleet and had never been considered significant by anyone. The Oran, tall, slow-moving people who communicated primarily through color changes in their skin. Their homeworld was in the outer sectors, not far from human space. They had not retreated because they had nowhere to retreat to. The Vel Secundus, a splinter group of the larger Vel civilization that had broken from the main body 400 years ago over a disagreement Joran had never fully understood. They had stayed not out of bravery, exactly, but because the main Vel body had not invited them to join the withdrawal, and pride was, it turned out, a universal constant. Joran met with all 3 delegations in the same week. Same room each time, a small conference space off the main hall, where the heating system still worked and there was a functional beverage dispenser that produced something vaguely similar to tea. The Tharaki ambassador was a small creature named Sivith, whose 6 arms were in constant, gentle motion and whose compound eyes caught light in a way that made Joran feel like he was being studied from every angle simultaneously, which he probably was. Your people fight, Sivith said. It was not a question. Yes, Joran said. You fight knowing you cannot win. We fight knowing we haven't lost yet. Sivith's arms stilled for a moment, then resumed their motion. There is a difference, Sivith said. We had not considered that distinction. The Oran ambassador, a massive person named Drell, who communicated through an interpreter because their vocal range was beyond human hearing, turned deep gold when Joran described the Battle of Kepler Station. Gold, the interpreter explained, was what the Oran did when they were feeling something they did not have a word for in any other language. We have 43 ships, Drell's interpreter said. We had thought them useless against the Dreth. We did not know useless could still mean something. The Vel Secundus took the longest. Their lead representative, a woman named Arath, who dressed in the same stark black clothes every time Joran met her, and had the kind of face that gave nothing away, listened to everything he said without expression. Then she was quiet for a long time. The main Vel body will return when this is over, she said at last. When humanity is gone, and the Dreth have finished, and the sector is quiet again, they will come back and act as if they were never afraid, and they will expect us to fall back in line. That might happen, Joran said. I find that I am extremely tired, Arath said, of thing happening that I dislike. She looked at him with flat, level eyes. We have 60 ships, she said. Older models. The main body took the best ones when they left, but they are functional. A pause. Tell your commander Voss that the Vel Secundus will coordinate with the human fleet, not under her command. Alongside it. It was the most important word Joran had heard in weeks, alongside. Elena Voss received the news about the 3 allied delegations while she was in the middle of planning an operation at the Crest Passage, a narrow channel between 2 dense debris fields that the Dreth were using as a highway toward the populated inner edge of human space. She read Joran's message. She noted the ship counts. 6 Thorca 3 Oran, 60 Vel Secundus. Small numbers, badly outmatched numbers. Numbers that had not existed for humanity a month ago. She wrote back, tell them we're grateful. Tell them we'll use them well. Then she turned back to the Crest Passage map. The operation she was planning was not elegant. It was not the kind of thing they would ever write up in a military academy textbook, because military academies assumed you had a functional fleet and a supply line, and someone in charge of logistics, who was not also the person doing all the fighting. What she had was people. Human beings who had grown up on ships and stations and colonies across the outer sectors, who knew this space the way you know the neighborhood you grew up in. Not from maps, but from memory. From the knowledge that this particular debris field drifted 2 degrees east every 6 months, that the gravitational pull off the crest's eastern wall played tricks on navigation systems, that there was a way through the passage that didn't appear on any standard chart, because it had been found by a smuggler named Darabek 40 years ago, and had been passed down word of mouth ever since. Elena had served with someone who knew that route. She pulled up her communications log and sent a message to a retired freighter captain named Yusuf Chen, who was currently running supply runs between 3 colonies with a ship that made Sato's retrofitted mining hauler look like a luxury vessel. She asked him about the Darabek route. He replied in 6 minutes with a set of coordinates and a single line. "You're going to get people killed in there." She wrote back, "I know, thank you." Yusuf Chen's supply run stopped that day. He repurposed his freighter and joined the fleet. The operation at Crest Passage ran 4 days later. It was not a battle. The word battle implied 2 sides meeting and fighting. What happened at Crest Passage was closer to surgery, performed by people who had never been to medical school but had read every book on the subject and were operating on themselves. Elena sent 9 ships through the Darabek route, which was so narrow that 2 of the ships had to fly with their shields angled down to avoid scraping the debris walls. They came out on the far side of the passage behind the Dreth column that was moving through. Behind them, the Dreth had never been hit from behind before. There was nothing in any engagement record in the Conclave's archives, 4,000 years of records, showing a force engaging the Dreth from behind, inside a debris field, using the field itself as cover, retreating through gaps that were too small for the Dreth units to follow. 9 ships went in. The Dreth column turned. The 50-second hesitation became 90 seconds because they were turning in a confined space. Elena's 9 ships hit them in those 90 seconds and then went back through the debris. Back through, not away from. Through. 1 Dreth unit was disabled. Not destroyed, disabled. It stopped moving. For 15 minutes, it was completely still. Every sensor operator on every human ship in range watched it and stopped breathing. Then it moved again. But for those 15 minutes, 1 Dreth unit had been stopped by 9 human ships. Elena Voss received the sensor data in her command chair and looked at it for a long time. She had not expected that. She had hoped for a delay, a minor disruption, enough to buy another colony more hours. She had not expected to actually stop one. "Same weapons that stopped it," she said to Day Park. "What did we use in that window?" He checked the report. The graviton burst from the Yun's sword, and the Vel Secundus coordinated a compressed EM pulse from their 2 ships on the eastern flank. She looked at that. Graviton burst plus compressed electromagnetic pulse from flanking positions. She wrote it down. "Run the math," she said. "If we had more ships capable of that combination." "We don't," Day said. "Not yet," she said. The news out of Crest Passage reached Joran Hale 2 days later, third hand, carried through a relay chain that was held together more by hope than by functioning hardware. It reached the Tharaki ambassador the same day. Siveth listened to the full report with all 6 arms perfectly still, which the Tharaki interpreter explained was the most intense form of attention their species was capable of. "They stopped one," Siveth said. "Yes, a human fleet. Yes." All 6 arms remained still for another long moment. "We would like," Siveth said carefully, "to send our 6 ships to join Commander Voss's operations." Joran nodded. He had been expecting this. "They'll be glad to have you," he said. What he did not say, and what Siveth probably knew without being told, was that the news was already spreading further. Not just through the 3 allied delegations, through the deep space relay chains and the black market communication networks, and the word-of-mouth lines that connected every species with people stuck in the outer sectors, who hadn't managed to get out before the Conclave left. There were others out there. Small species, minor powers, peoples who had never been important enough for the Conclave to give them a vote. They had been left behind too. Some of them had been living in the outer sectors for generations. They had no fleets and no power, and no way to fight the Dreth. They had been watching humanity, and humanity was still standing. It was Priya Anand who first made contact. She was 3 weeks out of the medical bay, still moving carefully, still with the bandages on her hands changed twice daily by a medic who told her she should not be on a bridge yet. She was on the bridge. She had put on her uniform and walked to the bridge and sat in the command chair of the replacement ship they had given her. A smaller vessel than the one she had lost, with a crew that was 20% new recruits who had never seen a Dreth unit. And she had started running operations out of a sector that everyone had assumed was already lost. The contact came in on an emergency frequency, a short burst transmission in a language she didn't recognize. She ran it through the translation system and got a fragmented message. "Still here. Not running, do you hear us?" She responded immediately. "We hear you. Who are you?" The reply took 6 hours to come back, because whoever was sending it was clearly being careful. Moving, probably. Using different relay points each time. When it arrived, it was longer, more confident. "We are the Seth. 17,000 people on 4 stations in the Karun Belt. We have mining equipment and 1 armed transport. We are not soldiers, but we are not dead yet. We heard what happened at Kepler Station. We heard about the Crest Passage. We have information about Dreth movement patterns in this sector that your fleet may not have. Priya read it twice. Then she sent it to Elena Voss. Elena read it once. She sent back, accept. Get me everything they have. What the Seth sent over the next week was not military intelligence in any formal sense. It was 17,000 people's worth of observation. Miners and transport workers and station engineers who had been watching the Dreth move through their sector for weeks, tracking patterns out of pure survival instinct, noting the things that seemed to make the Dreth slow down or change course, the frequencies that seemed to interfere with their movement, the places where they clustered, and the places they consistently avoided. It was raw, unprocessed, unverified. Elena's analyst worked for 36 straight hours processing it. What they found changed the tactical picture in ways that no amount of pure fleet intelligence could have managed. The Dreth avoided certain gravitational gradients. Not all of them, but specific ones, at specific frequencies. Nobody in the Conclave's 4,000 years of records had noted it, because nobody had been watching from the ground up. The elder races fought the Dreth from a distance, from behind walls. The Seth had been living among them, in the spaces between them, invisible and frightened and paying very close attention. Elena stood over her tactical map for a long time after receiving the final analysis report. Around her, the bridge crew was quiet. "We've been fighting them like we're trying to hold them back," she said. Nobody answered. "We should be fighting them like we're trying to herd them." She looked up at Day Park. "Get me Sato, Anand, and the Vel Secundus command. And get me the Seth frequency data on the gravitational gradients," she paused. "And get me Yusuf Chen. I want to know how many more routes through this sector he knows about that aren't on any official chart." Day was already moving. Elena turned back to the map. The outer sectors, human space, her space, and the space of 300 other species who had never been powerful enough to earn a vote at the conclave table. The Dreth were still coming, still vast and patient and certain of their right to everything they touched. But they were moving through a sector that was full of people who had not left. People who were watching every move they made, sharing what they saw, telling each other where to go and how to survive and where the gaps were. The elder races had looked at the outer sectors and seen a frontier. What they had actually left behind was something they did not have a word for, something that had no good equivalent in any language Elena knew, except maybe one. Home. You fight differently for home. The Dreth were about to find that out. Nobody talked about the numbers out loud. They all knew them. Every commander, every crew member, every colony administrator still standing in the outer sectors knew exactly how many people had been lost since the conclave left. The figure updated every day on the internal fleet network, quietly, the way a wound keeps bleeding after you stop looking at it. 4,112,000 as of the morning Elena Voss sat down with her senior staff to review the week's operations. She did not say the number. Nobody did. It sat in the room like a presence. What she said instead was, "Show me the gradient map." Her chief analyst, a young woman named Hessa Obara, who had been a graduate student in astrophysics before the conclave left and had become something harder and faster in the months since, pulled up the map on the main display. It was a sector-wide picture of gravitational frequencies, overlaid with the movement data from the Seth's weeks of silent observation. Everywhere the Dreth moved freely was one color. Everywhere they had slowed, avoided, or rerouted was another. The pattern was clear once you knew what you were looking for. "Here," Hessa said, pointing to a dense cluster of the avoidance markers. "And here, and here. These 3 areas have the highest concentration of the specific gradient frequency that correlates with Dreth rerouting. They don't go near them. Every time they've approached, they've changed course." "We don't know why," Day Park said. He was not being negative, just careful. "We don't need to know why," Elena said. "We need to know if we can make more of it." Hessa had been waiting for that question. She pulled up a second display. "The frequency is naturally occurring. It comes from specific mass distributions in asteroid fields and dense debris zones. We can't generate it with any weapon we have." She paused. "But we can move mass." Silence. "Tractor systems," Elena said. "Yes, it would take time. Weeks of careful repositioning of large asteroids in the right configurations. It would need to look natural. If the Dreth noticed we were building something, they'd go around it." Hessa looked at the map. "But if we could construct 3 or 4 of these zones along the approach vectors, toward the populated colonies, we could funnel them. We could choose where they go." Elena stared at the map for a long time. "You cannot beat the wave. You make the wave go somewhere it doesn't want to go." How many ships do we need? She said. Mining ships, Hessa said, not warships. The tractor work needs precision, not firepower. Yusuf Chen, sitting in the corner of the room in his worn freighter captain's jacket, raised his hand. I know 14 independent mining operators still running in this sector. They haven't joined because they didn't think they had anything to offer a war. They do now, Elena said. Get them. The construction of the gradient corridors took 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which the Dreth kept moving and the human fleet kept bleeding to buy time. Riku Sato held the line at New Meridian for 11 days with a fleet that shrank by 1 ship every 2 days. He ran the asteroid nudging strategy until he had nothing left to work with, then switched to hit-and-run passes that kept the Dreth cluster occupied and irritated, and focused on him instead of the evacuation routes. On day 9, his last destroyer took a direct hit. He transferred his command to the retrofitted mining hauler, the ugly welded thing that his crew had built out of spite and determination, and kept going. On day 11, the gradient corridors were almost ready. Elena sent him the message herself, 3 more days. Hold 3 more days. His reply came back in 4 words, working on it, Commander. He held 2 more days. On the morning of day 13, the mining hauler's drive system failed, not from enemy fire, from the sheer accumulated strain of 11 days of combat maneuvers in a ship that had been designed to carry ore. Sato and his crew spent 6 hours in suits doing emergency repairs in open space exposed with a Dreth unit 4,000 kilometers away. They got 1 engine back. He held 1 more day. When the corridor network came online on day 14, it was Sato's sensor data, transmitted in real time from his single functioning engine, his battered crew, his ugly welded ship, that confirmed the Dreth approaching New Meridian had shifted course exactly as Hessa had predicted. New Meridian's final evacuation convoy got out. Elena received Sato's status report at the same time. She read down the list of damage, then she read to the end. The mining hauler had not made it out with the convoy. She sat with that for a moment. Then she wrote his name on the list she kept. The one that was not the official casualty report. The one she kept herself in handwriting on actual paper, because some things should not live only inside a computer. Commander Riku Sato. She closed the notebook, and she kept working. 5,600,000. The number updated. She did not say it out loud. The gradient corridor strategy worked. Not perfectly. Nothing worked perfectly. But it worked in the way that mattered. It changed the shape of the fight. For the first time since the Dreth entered human space, humanity was not just reacting. They were directing. The Dreth moved where the corridors guided them, not because they were fooled, not because they were stupid, but because the gradient frequencies were real, and the aversion was real in the Dreth, for all their vast dark patience were following the same instincts they had always followed. They were being herded toward the Karun Belt. The Karun Belt was the Seth's home. 17,000 people on 4 stations, all of whom had evacuated 2 weeks earlier at Priyanon's insistence, and left behind fully operational mining equipment and 3 stations full of the dense, compressed ore that was the belt's primary product, and 17 months of accumulated compressed methane in storage tanks the size of city blocks. Elena had not told the Seth what she was planning to do with their home. She had asked them if they were willing to let her use it. She had told them honestly that she would try to save the structures if she could, but that she could not promise it. The Seth selected speaker, a small, quiet person named Voth who communicated through text because their species' spoken language required frequencies no human translator could process, had taken 4 hours to respond. When the response came, it was brief. We have lived in the Karun Belt for 6 generations. Our grandparents built those stations. But our grandparents built them for us, and we are not there anymore. You may use them. Elena had read that 3 times. The Dreth cluster moved into the Karun Belt on a Thursday, 3 units, each the size of a city, moving through the dense asteroid field with the slow, absolute certainty of things that had never been seriously threatened. Elena had 41 ships positioned in the debris fields surrounding the belt, not inside, outside in the shadows of the larger asteroids, running on minimal power to reduce their sensor signature. Alongside them, the 60 ships of the Vel Secundus were spread across the far edge of the field. The 43 Oron vessels held the northern approach. The 6 Tharaki ships, fast and small and precise, were positioned at the 3 exit vectors. None of them moved. The Dreth came deeper into the belt. Hessa, from her station on the Constant, tracked the movement on her sensors and called the positions in a quiet, steady voice, the way someone might read out the weather. Calm, because being calm was the only way to keep 41 crews calm. First unit passing marker 7, she said. Second unit at marker 4. Third unit entering the primary zone. Elena watched the screen. First unit at marker 9, Hessa said. All 3 units within the primary zone. Distance between units, closing. They're converging on the central station. They always converged on the largest structure. Another pattern from the Seth's observations. They were drawn to the highest mass concentration the way water runs to the lowest point. Yusuf, Elena said. Yusuf Chen, piloting his own ship because he refused to let anyone else do this part, said Ready. Do it, she said. He triggered the detonation sequence on the storage tanks of 3 Seth mining stations simultaneously. Compressed methane does not explode in space the way it explodes in atmosphere. There is no oxygen to feed a fire. What it does, when released under massive pressure in a dense debris field, is expand with extraordinary force and velocity, moving every piece of matter in its vicinity outward like a shockwave. A shockwave perfectly tuned because Hesse had spent 2 weeks calculating this to pulse at the specific frequency that the Dreth found intolerable. The first Dreth unit stopped moving, not slowed, stopped. Every screen on every human ship showed the same thing. A Dreth unit, 3 kilometers of dark mass that had moved through the outer sectors like it owned them, completely, entirely still. For a moment nobody breathed, then it started to break apart, slowly, not dramatically. The way a very old structure finally gives way, piece by piece, the coherence going out of it. The thing that made it a unit instead of just matter gradually, irreversibly stopping. The second unit began to pull back. The third unit turned. That was when Elena said, all ships now. 41 human ships came out of the debris shadows. 60 Velsecundus vessels closed the far edge. The Orin came in from the north. The second unit took damage, serious damage. It retreated slowly, shedding mass. The third unit made it out of the belt. The Tharaki ships harassed it at the exit vector, precise and fast, cutting across its path again and again. It kept going, damaged but moving. 1 Dreth unit destroyed, 1 severely damaged and retreating, 1 escaped. Elena looked at the numbers. She looked at the ships she had lost. 2 of them the Velsecundus vessels, whose crews she had never met but whose names were now part of her list. She looked at the Karun belt on the screen, where 6 generations of Seth history was burning slowly in the debris. She did not call it a victory, but she called it what it was, a proof. They could die. The Drith could die. The news reached the core system 17 days later. Not through any official channel. The Conclave's communications network was controlled by the Elder Races, and the Elder Races had been carefully not asking about what was happening in the outer sectors. Because asking implied caring, and caring implied responsibility. And responsibility was exactly what they had voted to abandon. But the deep space independent networks were not controlled by the Conclave, and the trading ships that moved between the outer sectors and the core, there were still some, desperate captains running dangerous routes for enormous fees, carried people who had seen things. Word spread, a Dreth unit destroyed, in the Karan belt, by a human fleet operating alongside 3 minor species. Using a gravitational frequency strategy derived from intelligence gathered by a civilization of 17,000 miners, who had been watching from inside the debris fields, in the core systems, in the great protected stations where the Elder Races had retreated with their dreadnoughts and their ancient dignity. People who had not thought about the outer sectors in months found themselves thinking about them. Some of them felt nothing. Some of them felt something they did not want to name. Kel Sari, junior aide to a senior aide to a mid-ranking official in the Sarathi Diplomatic Corps, was sitting in her quarters on the main Sarathi hub station when she heard. She had been drinking coffee. She had found a place here that sold it, imported it from somewhere, probably black market, and the cup was still in her hand when the news came through her personal communicator. She set the cup down very carefully. She picked up her personal communicator and opened a message to Joran Hale. She had not contacted him since she left the Conclave station. She had told herself it was because there was nothing useful to say. She had known that was not the real reason. She wrote, I heard. I wanted you to know I heard. And then she sat for a long time looking at the blinking cursor, and then she wrote, I am sorry we left. I am sorry I left. I don't know if sorry means anything from here. She sent it before she could decide not to. Joran received it on the Conclave station, which had taken on the quality of a very old outpost. Worn in, settled, the quiet kind of busy that comes from people who have been in one place long enough to stop wondering when they'll leave. He had staff now. Not a full delegation. 4 people, all of them volunteers who had stayed behind when the official diplomatic corps retreated with the Conclave. They ran the communication relays, maintained contact with Elena's fleet, tracked the movement of the 3 allied delegations' ships, and occasionally slept, though not enough. He read Kelsari's message twice. Then he wrote back, it means something. It always means something. Then he paused and wrote, tell people what you hear. Don't let them pretend they don't know. He sent it and went back to work. There was a lot of work. The victory in the Karun Belt had brought 3 more small species forward. Cautious, frightened. Their leaders sending fragmented messages through third and fourth-hand relay chains, asking the same question in different languages. "Are you still there?" he answered everyone. Same answer each time, because it was the only answer that was true. "We're still here." On the EFS Constant, Elena Voss sat in her command chair and looked at her tactical map for a long time. 6,200,000. She had stopped making herself not look at the number. She looked at it every morning. She held it for 60 seconds before she started work. She had decided that was the minimum a person owed to the weight of it. Then she started work. The Gradient Corridor network needed to be extended. The 3 allied fleets needed new coordination protocols now that they had actually fought together. The intelligence from the Seth was being cross-referenced with new observations coming in from 2 of the other small species who had made contact. And the picture they were building of Dreth movement patterns was getting clearer and clearer and darker and darker. The Dreth were redirecting, not retreating, not afraid, but they were responding to what had happened in the Karun Belt, changing the composition of their clusters, moving differently. They were adapting. Elena looked at that fact for a long time. Everything that had ever hunted anything that could adapt had learned the same hard lesson. It becomes a different hunt. Hessa, she said. The 2 new species making contact, the ones sending observation data from the Ur passage. Have we verified their frequency reports? Most of them, Hessa said. There's one anomaly we haven't been able to explain. Tell me about the anomaly. This was how every breakthrough had started. With a thing that didn't fit. With someone looking at the data that didn't make sense instead of setting it aside. There's a point in the Ur passage, Hessa said, pulling up the display, where 3 separate observers from 2 different species have noted the Dreth slowing. Not stopping, just slowing. There's no gravitational gradient explanation, no debris field. The space is clear. Elena looked at the point on the map. What is in that area? She said. Nothing, Hessa said, as far as we know. Old survey data says it's empty space. She paused, but the old survey data was done by the Conclave. And the Conclave surveys only covered what the Conclave considered worth surveying. Elena looked at her. Find me someone from this region, she said. Local. Someone who's lived near the Ur passage for a long time. I'll contact Joran, Hessa said. Do it tonight, Elena said. She turned back to the map. The Dreth were adapting. So was humanity. So were the Tharaki and the Oran, the Vel Secundus and the Seth, and the small species coming forward one by one out of the dark. The elder races had left the outer sectors to die. What they had actually done was leave them alone together, with nothing to lose and nowhere to run, and every reason in the world to figure out how to survive. Elena put her hand on the map, flat on the screen, over the place where Earth was marked, 40 light years from the nearest core system. She was going to need every one of those light years. The answer to the Ur passage anomaly was embarrassing in the way that most important discoveries are embarrassing. Obvious in hindsight, overlooked for a reason that made sense at the time and made no sense at all once you knew. It was a research station. Human-built, 83 years old, launched before humanity joined the Conclave and before humanity had the budget for proper maintenance schedules. It had been catalogued, filed, and quietly forgotten when the Conclave offered access to their far superior observation network. It ran on a closed-loop fusion system that the original engineers had designed to last a century without service. It was still running. Nobody had bothered to shut it down because nobody had thought about it in 40 years. The station's power system emitted a low-level electromagnetic pulse on a cycle of every 11 seconds. Hessa Obara found the station record buried in the Earth Science Directorate's pre-conclave archive and stared at the emission frequency for a long time. Then she checked it against the Dreth avoidance data. Then she said a word that Elena Voss had never heard her say before and ran the numbers 3 more times. The pulse frequency matched. Not approximately, exactly. The old, forgotten, accidental heartbeat of a research station that nobody had thought about in 4 decades was by pure chance operating at the precise frequency that the Dreth found intolerable. Every 11 seconds for 83 years. Elena received the report, read it twice, and then sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment with a specific expression of someone processing a thing that is simultaneously wonderful and infuriating. How hard is it to replicate that emission system, she said. The original hardware is old, Hessa said. The design is simple by current standards. We could build emitter units in 48 hours with the manufacturing equipment on Kepler Station's salvaged platforms. How many could we build? In 2 weeks. enough to mount on every ship in the fleet. Build them, she said. Start now. Build as many as you can, she paused. And get me the specifications to the Vel Secundus, the Oran, and the Tharaki. All of our allies. Everyone gets this. Hessa was already moving. Elena turned back to her tactical map. The Dreth had been adapting. She had been watching Wadding the Print Shift for 3 weeks. The clusters moving differently, the approach vectors changing, the spacing between units widening in a way that told her someone or something was responding to what had happened at the Karun belt. Not panicking, not afraid, but acknowledging that the outer sectors were not the empty space they had expected. They were recalibrating, and they were consolidating. The scattered cluster approach was ending. The Dreth were pulling together into a single massive formation, the largest concentration of their forces seen since the war began. Moving, according to every piece of intelligence humanity and its allies could gather, in one direction toward Sol. Toward Earth, the message went out on every human frequency simultaneously. Elena did not dress it up. There was no point in dressing it up, and the people who would receive it had earned the right to plain language. The Dreth are moving toward Sol. We have approximately 22 days before they reach the outer system. This will be the largest engagement of the war. I am asking every ship that can fly to come to Sol. Not just military vessels. Every ship. If you can travel and you can carry an emitter unit and you are willing, come. If you are not willing, go where you need to go. There is no shame in it, but if you are willing, come. She sent it. Then she sat back and waited to see who answered. In the core systems, Kelsari had been doing what Joran asked. She told people what she heard. She found ways to talk about it. Not officially. Not in the conclave sessions that she was too junior to attend. But in the corridors and the common areas and the informal meetings where the actual thinking of any civilization gets done. She told her colleagues. She told the people above her colleagues. She found Sarathi citizens who had family in the outer sectors, more of them than anyone had officially acknowledged, and she made sure they heard every piece of news she received from Joran's relay chains. She had not expected it to add up to anything. She had been doing it because Joran asked her to, and because it was the only thing she could do. And because doing nothing felt like a particular kind of dying she was not interested in. But things add up. 2 weeks before Elena's message reached the core systems, a junior member of the Vel Governing Council, the main body, not the Secundus, had submitted a formal inquiry asking why the Conclave's intelligence reports on the outer sectors had been consistently incomplete since the withdrawal. The inquiry had been dismissed. But it had been submitted, and once submitted it was part of the record, and other people read it. A week before Elena's message, a Keth historian with a modest public following had published a paper drawing historical comparisons between the current withdrawal and 3 previous conclave retreats from outer sector threats. In 2 of those 3 cases, the historian noted, the abandoned species had been destroyed entirely. In the third, a small coalition of abandoned peoples had held long enough for the main threat to move past them, and the outer sectors had been resettled 300 years later. But only because there had been someone left to resettle them. The paper was not widely read, but it was read by people who read things. When Elena's call reached the core systems, through black market relay networks and independent traders and the quiet machinery of people telling other people, it landed in a community that had been, without quite realizing it, getting ready to hear it. 7,900,000. Elena kept looking at it, 60 seconds every morning. Then work. The emitter units went into production at 4 separate manufacturing points across the outer sectors. Salvaged equipment, Seth engineering expertise, 3 different alien technical teams working alongside human engineers who had been figuring things out on the fly for months. The first batch was mounted on fleet ships in 36 hours. The second batch was larger. Elena had routed enough materials to build 400 units. She built 600. The extra 200 were sized and designed to fit on civilian vessels. Mining ships and transport haulers, and the kind of general-purpose cargo craft that kept colonies running. Ships that were never meant to be in a fight. Ships that could, if they chose, carry a device that would make them relevant in a way that no weapon ever could. The emitter units did not fire anything. They did not destroy anything. They pulsed. Every 11 seconds, a low-level electromagnetic frequency, tuned to the exact output of an 83-year-old research station, that an engineer named Yael Okonkwo had designed on a modest government budget in 2304, when the biggest problem humanity was facing was whether the conclave would accept their application for membership. Yael Okonkwo had been dead for 30 years. Elena had looked her up. She had the kind of quiet, practical biography of someone who just did good work and never expected it to matter beyond the immediate job. It was going to matter more than anything else in the war. They came. Not just the human ships, not just the 3 allied fleets that had been fighting alongside humanity for months, not just the Seth in their rebuilt transport, the one that Voth had named after everything. Because Voth had a particular kind of humor that found the right words in dark places. They came from everywhere. Species so small and scattered that they had never appeared in any conclave record as a significant power. A group of 7 ships from a people called the Marin, who lived on stations in the deep gas clouds of the Outer Arm, and had never in their history fought anyone. The Marin sent 7 ships crewed by people who had spent 3 weeks learning how to mount emitter units after receiving Elena's technical specifications through 4 separate relay jumps. A fleet of 19 vessels from the DU, a long-lived people whose government had officially voted to remain neutral, but whose population had quietly produced a group of volunteers who took 19 ships and left before anyone could stop them. 41 mining haulers from the Karun Belt region, crewed by whoever had been available and willing to come, carrying emitter units and improvised weapons, and, in 3 cases, full cargo holds of compressed ore that their captains had decided might be useful for reasons they did not explain in their join requests. The 3 conclave species who had voted no, the Tharaki, the Oran, the Vel Secundus, arrived in full formation, all 6 Tharaki ships, all 43 Oran vessels, all 60 Vel Secundus, with Arith commanding from her flagship, which she had renamed in the weeks since Karun Belt in a language that translated, roughly as, "I changed my mind about waiting." In total, when Elena Voss looked at her fleet assembly screen 11 days before the Dreth reached the outer markers of the Sol system, she counted 314 ships. Of those, 47 were formal military vessels, the rest were everything else. She stood at the viewport and looked at them. The irregular shapes of mining haulers and transport ships and general-purpose cargo craft, their hulls scarred in most cases not by battle but by years of hard work in hard places, now carrying emitter units and whatever weapons their crews had managed to put together. Day Park stood beside her. "We didn't call them," he said, not questioning it, just saying it. "No," she said. "They just came." "Yes," he was quiet for a moment. "I don't think the Conclave has ever seen anything like this." "The Conclave has never left people like this before," Elena said. "Or maybe they have and nobody survived to show them what it looks like." She turned back to her map. 314 ships, emitter units on 260 of them. The gravitational corridor data extended to cover the approach vectors to Sol. Intelligence, from a dozen small species whose observations had added detail and texture to her understanding of Dreth behavior that no formal military intelligence program could have produced. It was not enough. She knew it was not enough. She had run the numbers. The Dreth formation moving towards Sol was the largest single concentration of their forces anywhere in the outer sectors. What humanity and its allies were bringing to this fight was extraordinary, unprecedented, and significantly outmatched. But it was everything they had. And everything, in Elena Voss's experience, had a way of mattering more than the numbers suggested. The battle for Sol began on a Wednesday. The Dreth came through the outer system in 3 massive waves, each one larger than the entire human fleet had faced in any previous engagement. They came from the direction of the outer asteroid belt, moving with the same slow, vast certainty they always moved with, but arranged differently now. Tighter clusters, less spacing between units, the adaptation that had been building since Karun Belt fully expressed. They were taking humanity seriously. Elena felt something sharp and strange about that. Not pride, exactly, something older than pride. She gave the order, and 314 ships moved to meet them. The emitters fired on the 11-second cycle, and the effect was immediate. Not dramatic, the Dreth did not stop, did not scatter, but they compressed. The front wave tightened, the units moving closer together in a way that Hess's models had predicted and Elena had been counting on. They compressed into the corridors. The gravitational configurations that the mining ships had been building for 2 weeks, subtle, precise, tuned to match the gradient frequencies from the Seth's data, funneled the compressed Dreth formation along specific vectors, not where the Dreth wanted to go, where humanity needed them to go, into the engagement zones. The human fleet went in from 3 sides. The Vel Secundus hit the northern flank. The Oran drove straight up the center with the kind of blunt courage that Elena had come to understand was simply how the Oran did things. Not recklessness, just a deep, considered decision that if they were going to be somewhere dangerous, they would be completely there. The Tharaki, fast and precise, worked the edges, targeting the connections between Dreth units with the specific frequency combination that had disabled the unit at Karun Belt, and the civilian ships, the mining haulers, the transport craft, the Maren and their 7 vessels, the Du volunteers. Yusuf Chen in his eternal battered freighter held the corridor walls, keeping the formation intact, their emitters running without stopping, their crews doing the thing that requires a particular kind of courage, because it is not the loud kind. The courage of staying in a dangerous place and doing a technical job correctly while things explode around you. For 3 hours the first wave was held, not destroyed, held. Slowed, compressed, forced to fight in conditions that did not favor them. Then the second wave arrived. The second wave was larger. Elena lost 11 ships in 40 minutes. She felt each one on the sensor board the way you feel a step that isn't there. A sudden absence where something had been. She did not stop working. She moved assets, redirected, found new angles, called on reserves she had been holding back specifically for this moment. 8,120,000. The number updated in the back of her mind even as she worked. It was always updating. She had stopped thinking of it as a number and started thinking of it as a sound. A low, constant tone underneath everything she did. She would not turn it off. She would not stop hearing it. Priya Anand, commanding from her ship on the southern corridor, took 2 direct hits and kept her position. Her communications were fragmented by the damage. Her voice coming through broken, words cutting out, but the content was always clear. Still here, still holding. Joran Hale on the Conclave station was receiving real-time relay updates and passing them to Kelsari, who was passing them to everyone she could reach. Not military intelligence, something else. The simple ongoing fact of it. The names of ships still transmitting. The species still present, the count of the living. He had not slept in 36 hours. He sent updates and drank bad coffee and answered every incoming message with the same 2 words he had been sending for months. Because they were still true and they were all that mattered. Still here. In the Conclave's main session chamber, for the first time since the withdrawal, a formal debate had been called about the outer sectors. It had not been called by the Sarathi. It had been called by a coalition of 7 minor Conclave members. Species too small to have mattered in the original vote, who had listened to the news from the outer sectors for months, and had finally, collectively, had enough of listening. The debate was chaotic. The elder races objected to the premise. The Sarathi representative argued that the outer sectors had made their choices, and the core had made theirs, and the two were not interconnected. A Tharaki observer, Sivith, who had traveled from the Conclave station to the core specifically for this purpose, who had spent 3 months watching humanity fight and had a great deal to say about it, asked to address the chamber. The request was technically out of order. The Tharaki were too small to have formal floor access. 7 Conclave members immediately invoked the guest-to-speaker provision and gave a Sivith the floor anyway. Sivith stood in front of the Conclave chamber, 6 arms in motion, compound eyes catching every light in the room, and described, in precise and unhurried language, what they had seen in the outer sectors over the past 4 months. Not the battles, the decisions, the mining captain who repurposed his ship, the research station nobody remembered, the 17,000 people who gave their home to be used as a weapon, the 22-year-old corporal who kept transmitting data for 6 hours after the fight was over, the 314 ships that had come to Sol, not ordered, not conscripted, but choosing, each one independently, to come. When a Sivith finished, the chamber was quiet in the way large rooms are quiet when everyone in them is processing something at the same time. The debate resumed. It was still chaotic. Nothing was decided. But things had been said now that could not be unsaid. And in the silence after a Sivith's words, at least 3 of the elder race representatives had looked down at their hands instead of at each other. On the 3rd day of the Battle of Sol, the 3rd Dreth wave arrived. Elena was running on 4 hours of sleep in 60 hours, and a level of focus that had burned through everything else, and arrived at something very simple and very clear on the other side of exhaustion. She looked at the incoming wave on her screen, larger than the first 2, moving differently. The adaptation was complete now, the Dreth having reconfigured in response to everything humanity had thrown at them. 314 ships had become 261. The emitters were still running, every 11 seconds. She thought of Yalo Konkwo, dead 30 years, who had just done her job. She thought of Riku Sato, who had held 2 days longer than anyone could ask. She thought of the Seth's message. We built those stations for us, and we are not there anymore. She opened a channel to the full fleet, all 261 ships, every species, every language. The translators would handle it. The 3rd wave is here, she said. We have hurt them. We have slowed them. We have shown them and shown everyone watching that the outer sectors do not die quietly. She paused. I am not going to tell you what to do now. You all know what you're here for. You came here knowing what it might cost. Another pause. Whatever happens today, they will know we were here. Everyone will know we were here. She closed the channel. Daypark looked at her from his station. What's the play? He said. She looked at the third wave on the screen. She looked at her corridor configurations, her emitter positions, the assault angles she had been saving for exactly this moment. She looked at 261 ships that had no business being in a fight like this and were here anyway. We go forward, she said. And they did. The third wave broke on the emitters. Not all at once, not cleanly. It broke the way a very large and very old thing breaks, slowly, in pieces, each piece taking time, each one costing something before it went. Elena had been running the corridor strategy for 31 hours straight when she saw it begin to happen. The Dreth formation had been pushing into the Sol system with the same patient, absolute certainty they had carried through every kilometer of the outer sectors. But the emitters were running every 11 seconds. 219 ships still carrying the pulse. The others had lost their units to battle damage, not to enemy action, just to the simple punishment of being in a fight this long. 219 ships breathing in the same rhythm, the same frequency, the same pulse that an engineer named Yael Okonkwo had built into a station 83 years ago, because it was the most efficient power cycle for the equipment she was using. Every 11 seconds, the Dreth formation compressed further than it had before. Further than Elena had expected, further than Hess's models had predicted, which meant the models had been right about the direction and wrong about the magnitude, which meant the effect was stronger at high density than anyone had calculated. The front units of the third wave stopped, not permanently, not the way the Karun Belt unit had stopped, but enough. Enough for the corridor walls to hold, enough for the engaged Dreth units to find themselves in a fight they had not been designed for, pressed from three sides, pulsed every 11 seconds, unable to spread into the configuration that their size and their method required. Elena did not celebrate. She moved assets. She found the angle. She sent Priya Anand's ships into the gap that opened when the front units stopped, and she sent the Vel Secundus through the northern corridor at the same moment, and she told Yusuf Chen to bring the mining haulers forward and hold the eastern emitter line, no matter what happened. And Yusuf Chen said 3 words back that she would remember for the rest of her life. Leave it, Commander. The gap held. For 40 minutes, the third wave was completely stalled in the outer asteroid belt of the Sol system, 400 million kilometers from Earth. And then, on Elena's long-range sensors, something appeared at the edge of the system. Large, fast, very large. Daypark looked at his screen and then looked at Elena and did not speak for a moment. Sarathi dreadnoughts, he said. 7 of them. Pause. And Vel carriers. 3. And stopped again. The Kethark ships are here, Commander. The Keth are here. Elena looked at the screen. The Conclave fleet, some of it, not all, but the part that had decided, had come. They had come too late to save humanity. They had arrived in time to watch humanity saving itself. She thought several things at once, some of them uncharitable, and kept all of them behind her face. Tell them to hold position at the system edge, she said. Do not let them advance into the corridor structure. If they break the corridor geometry with their mass, we lose everything we've built. Day sent the message. The Sarathi dreadnoughts held position, and humanity kept fighting. The third wave broke at hour 39. It did not retreat immediately. The Dreth did not do anything immediately. But the coherence went out of the formation. The same quality Elena had watched leave the Karun Belt unit, that gradual loss of the thing that made many pieces into one. And when the coherence was gone, what remained were individual units, still vast and dark and dangerous, but separated. Without the density, without the collective weight, and separated Dreth units Elena had learned could be managed. Not easily, not without cost, but managed. It took 9 more hours. The Sarathi dreadnoughts held the system edge and did not fire a single shot because Elena told them not to, and to their credit. Or perhaps simply because they were watching what was happening and understood that whatever this was, they were not the ones running it, they obeyed. At hour 48, the last Dreth unit that had entered the Sol system crossed back out of it. They did not go far. They pulled back to the outer edge of the asteroid belt, to the region between the system's final planet and the deep space beyond. Not gone, not destroyed, but out of the system, out of the space they contained, 40 light-years from the nearest core system, a planet called Earth. Elena Voss sat in her command chair and did not move for a while. Around her, the bridge was very quiet. Not the silence of people holding their breath. The silence of people who have been awake for 2 days and have come to the end of a very long road and have not yet figured out how to start breathing normally again. Day Park set a cup of coffee on her armrest. She did not know where he had found it. She did not ask. Casualties, she said. He read them out. She listened to every number. Ship counts first, then crew, then the running total, the one that had been updating since the day the conclave left. 9,400,000. She sat with it for 60 seconds. Then she drank the coffee. The conclave convened an emergency session 4 days after the Battle of Sol, not because they wanted to. Because the 7 minor member species who had called the debate during the battle now had the full weight of what had happened behind them, and they were not going to be quiet about it. And the elder races had run the political calculation and determined that a controlled session was better than the alternative. Joran Hale was asked to address the conclave, not as a junior diplomat, as the senior human representative, in the absence of a full delegation, which made him technically the equivalent of an ambassador plenipotentiary, a term he had to look up to make sure he understood what it meant before he accepted. He accepted. He took a transport from the conclave station to the core systems. It was a 7-day journey. He spent most of it sleeping, which he had not been doing enough of for 4 months, and writing, which he had always done when he needed to understand what he thought. When he arrived at the conclave chamber, a room built for the scale of civilizations that had existed for thousands of years, with seating for 44 species and a floor that was a map of the known galaxy in inlaid stone. He stood at the speaker's position and looked at the assembled representatives of the galaxy's greatest powers for a moment before he spoke. He had thought about anger. He had a lot of material to work with. He had been saving some of it, he realized, for a very long time. Long before the conclave left, back through 11 years of watching humanity be treated like the newest face at a table set for everyone else. He set the anger aside, not because it wasn't earned, because there was something more important to say. You left us to die, he said. No preamble, no diplomatic opener. He had decided on the transport that he did not owe this room a diplomatic opener. The chamber was very still. 41 of you voted to leave the outer sectors to the Dreth. You calculated that we were not worth the cost of defending. You decided that humanity and 100 other small species and peoples in the outer sectors were acceptable losses. He paused. 9,400,000 people are dead. I want you to know that number. I want it to be in the record of this session. He let that sit. We did not die quietly, he said. You have seen the reports by now. You know what happened at Kepler Station, and the Brennan Field, and the Karun Belt, and the Crest Passage. You know what happened at Sol. You know who was there and who was not. He looked at the Sarathi section. Chancellor Var was present. His face gave nothing away. I am not here to ask for an apology, Joran said. I am not here to ask for reparations, though that conversation will happen, and humanity will be present for it. I am not here to demand anything from you. He paused. I am here to tell you something, a simple thing. Something I want in the record. The chamber waited. Humanity is still in the outer sectors, he said. The species that fought alongside us are still in the outer sectors. The Seth are rebuilding their stations in the Karun Belt. The Tharaki and the Orun and the Vel Secundus are still there. The Maren, the Du, the 12 other peoples who came to Sol, still there. We are not leaving. We were not destroyed, and we are not leaving, and we are not going to stop being present in the space you decided was not worth your attention. He looked out at the chamber. And the next time something comes for the outer sectors, and there will be a next time, there is always a next time, we will be there. We will be there for each other. Every species, every people, every civilization too small for a vote at this table, we will be there. He stopped. That is what I wanted to say, he said. We will be there. With always. He stepped back from the speaker's position. The chamber was quiet for a long moment. Then Sivith, who had no formal floor access and did not care, began to make a sound that the Tharaki make when they are expressing something that has no translation. It was a high continuous tone, all 6 arms extended fully. The Orin ambassador Drell turned a color that the interpreter later described as the Orin word, for something between recognition and grief and gratitude that exists in their language because they apparently needed a word for exactly that combination. The Vel Secundus representative stood up. Slowly other delegates stood, not all of them, not the Sarathi, not yet, but more than Joran had expected, and in places he had not expected them. He walked out of the chamber while they were still standing. He had said what he came to say. Elena Voss watched the conclave session through a relay feed on the bridge of the Constant, which was currently in low orbit around Earth, undergoing repairs significant enough that Day Park had told her, twice, that she should probably be on the planet's surface while the hull work was happening. She was on the bridge. She watched Joran speak. She watched him say we will be there, with always, and she felt something settle in her chest. A weight shifting, not lifting, but finding its right position for the first time in a very long time. She went down to Earth 2 days later. Not for long, there was too much work. The outer sectors needed rebuilding and the Allied fleet needed restructuring. And there were conversations with the Conclave that were going to take years. And there were 9,400,000 names that she had not yet finished adding to the list she kept in her notebook. Because each one got a second, and that was a lot of seconds. But she went for a few days. She went to a place she had not been since she was young. A coastline in the northern part of the continent where she had grown up, where the water was cold even in summer, and the cliffs were the color of old bone, and the wind came off the ocean with the smell of something very old and very permanent. She sat on the cliffs and looked at the water. She thought about Riku Sato, who had held 2 days longer than anyone could ask. She thought about Priya Anand, who was still in the fight, still in the medical reports, still sending one-line messages from her bridge that always ended, still here. She thought about Yusuf Chen, who had left his supply runs to join a war, and had been the one who detonated the Seth stations in the Karun belt, and had not spoken much since then, but who was still flying, still carrying emitter units to every species that asked for the specifications. She thought about Voth of the Seth. We built those stations for us, and we are not there anymore. She thought about Kelsari, who had told people what she heard. She thought about the Marin in their ships, learning to mount weapons they had never used on vessels never designed for it, coming anyway. She thought about Dea Yun Yun, 24 years old, holding her station for 6 hours because that was the job. She thought about all of it, the months of it, the weight of it, the 9,400,000 of it. She sat on the cliff and let it be as large as it was. After a while the wind shifted and the light on the water changed the way it does in the late afternoon, going from gray to something close to gold, and Elena Voss sat in it and breathed. There was so much still to do. The Dreth had pulled back, but they were not gone. The conclave was going to be a years-long negotiation full of people who were very good at making promises they had already broken once. The outer sectors needed rebuilding not just in physical terms, but in the slower, harder way. The way a community rebuilds after it has discovered what it can do and what it has lost, and has to find a way to hold both of those things at once. All of that was coming, but right now the Sol system was intact. Earth was below her, 8 billion people going about their days, most of them not fully understanding how close it had been, and that was fine, that was how it should be. Let them go about their days. Let them have ordinary Tuesdays. The species of the outer sectors, the ones who had always been too small for a vote, too far from the center to matter, too easy to write off as acceptable losses, were still there, still talking to each other, still sharing censored data and gravitational frequency readings, and the kind of knowledge that only comes from living close to the ground and paying attention to what the powerful ignore. They were not a formal alliance. They had no charter, no council, no flag. They had something harder to build and harder to take apart. The habit of answering when someone called. The knowledge that they had answered before and it had mattered. The understanding that out here in the outer sectors, the people who showed up for each other were the only walls that held. Elena looked at the horizon where the water met the sky. We will be there, Joran had said, with always. She understood it now, the way you understand something properly only after it has been lived and not just spoken. It was not a promise about the future, exactly. It was a description of what they already were, what the months of it had made them. Not a military force, not a political power, not a civilization that the Conclave would ever fully understand, because the Conclave thought in terms of resources and votes and strategic value and the math of acceptable losses. They were the people who stayed, the people who looked at the acceptable losses column and disagreed, the people who, when the wave came and the walls came down and every reasonable calculation said to run, went forward instead. Not because they were fearless, not because dying didn't cost anything, not because they had looked at 9,400,000 and found it acceptable, because home is not a calculation, because some things you stand for, not because the numbers work out, but because the numbers are not the whole story, and never were. Because when you have been left in the dark long enough, you find out who you are. Humanity had found out. So had the Tharaki and the Oran and the Velsecundus and the Seth and the Moran and the Dew, and 100 other small peoples, whose names were not in the Conclave's important records but were in Elena's notebook, because each one had gotten a second and each one had mattered. And each one was part of what they had built out here in the space the galaxy had decided was not worth saving. The light went golden, and the wind kept coming off the water, and Elena Voss sat on the cliff and let herself be, for one evening, exactly where she was. Tomorrow there would be work, but the outer sectors were standing. They were still there, with always.